Some secrets are buried so deep they don't just threaten your heart, they can destroy your entire world. And sometimes the person you trust most is carrying a truth so explosive that loving them becomes the most dangerous thing you've ever done. Hello, my beautiful souls. I hope you're having an absolutely amazing day, wherever you're watching from around this incredible world of ours. Please drop a comment and let me know what city or country you're tuning in from, because I genuinely love connecting with our global family. How are you doing today? Really, I want to know. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, you are seriously missing out on stories that will completely transform how you see love, secrets, and the power of truth to either heal or destroy everything you hold dear. Hit that subscribe button right now. These stories will change your life forever. Now let me tell you about Alexander Corleone and the moment when everything he thought he knew about love turned into a weapon that could annihilate his entire family. The gun in Isabella Laszlo's hand wasn't pointed at the intruder breaking into the Corleone estate at midnight. It was pointed directly at Alexander's heart. "Step away from the safe, Alexander." Isabella's voice carried a cold authority that Alexander had never heard in 18 months of stolen kisses, whispered confessions, and nights when she'd made him believe that love could exist without the weight of his billion-dollar empire crushing everything beautiful in his life. Alexander froze with his hand on the combination lock, his mind reeling as he processed the woman he'd fallen desperately in love with, his daughter Emma's nanny, the gentle soul who read bedtime stories and bandaged scraped knees, holding a weapon like someone trained to use it. "Isabella, what the hell?" "My name isn't Isabella Laszlo," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands that suggested this confrontation was as devastating for her as it was for him. "And I'm not here to steal your money." The moonlight streaming through the study windows caught the tears on her cheeks even as her grip on the gun never wavered. And Alexander felt his world tilting as 18 months of accumulated trust and growing love crashed into the reality of betrayal that cut deeper than any business deal gone wrong. "Then who are you?" Alexander demanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd built an empire from inherited wealth and strategic ruthlessness, but also the vulnerability of someone whose heart was breaking in real time. "I'm Elena Torino," she said, the name hitting Alexander like a physical blow. "Vincent Torino's daughter." Alexander's blood turned to ice as connections clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Vincent Torino, the man whose construction company had been destroyed by Corleone Industries' hostile takeover 15 years ago. The man who'd lost everything when Alexander's father had decided that Torino Construction was too successful to be allowed to compete. The man who'd committed suicide when bankruptcy and public humiliation had taken his company, his home, and his reputation. "Vincent Torino's daughter died in the car accident that killed him," Alexander said slowly, his mind racing through newspaper reports he'd read as a 20-year-old heir learning the brutal realities of his family's business practices. "Vincent Torino's daughter survived the car accident," Elena corrected, her voice carrying 15 years of suppressed grief and carefully planned revenge. "She spent 3 years in foster care, 5 years building a new identity, and 7 years preparing to destroy the family responsible for her father's death." The weight of betrayal that reached across decades settled over the study like a death sentence. Alexander realized that everything, Emma's devoted nanny, their secret relationship, the love that had made him believe in something beyond wealth and power, had been an elaborate deception designed to position Elena for this exact moment. "You've been planning this for 7 years, Alexander said, understanding the scope of patience and planning required for such comprehensive manipulation. "I've been planning this since I was 12 years old and watched my father's funeral from behind a tree because your family's lawyers made sure I wasn't allowed to attend," Elena replied, her voice carrying the accumulated rage of someone whose entire life had been shaped by injustice. Alexander felt sick as he processed the implications. "Emma, my daughter. You've been caring for my child while planning to destroy our family. I've been loving your daughter while hating everything your family represents," Elena said, her composure finally cracking to reveal the emotional complexity beneath her mission of revenge. "Alexander, Emma is innocent. What I feel for her, the way I've protected her, the bond we've built, that was never part of the plan. But what you feel for me was," Alexander realized, the betrayal cutting deeper because their relationship had felt like the most authentic thing in his carefully controlled life. Elena's gun hand was shaking now, the weapon wavering between determination and the obvious conflict tearing her apart. "What I feel for you was supposed to be hatred. What I feel for you was supposed to be professional manipulation designed to gain access to your family's secrets. And instead, I fell in love with you, Elena whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of emotions that had derailed her mission and complicated her revenge beyond anything she'd prepared for. I fell in love with the man who reads to Emma every night, who donates anonymously to children's hospitals, who looks at me like I'm worth more than the strategic value I represent. Alexander stared at the woman he'd loved in secret for months, seeing her clearly for the first time. Not just Isabella the gentle nanny, but Elena the woman whose life had been destroyed by his family's ruthless business practices, who'd spent years building a mission of revenge that his love had apparently shattered. What's in the safe that you need? Alexander asked quietly. Documents that prove your father knew Vincent Torino was being framed for construction fraud when Corleone Industries orchestrated his company's destruction, Elena replied. Evidence that the hostile takeover was based on fabricated allegations designed to eliminate competition. Alexander's stomach dropped as he understood the implications. My father didn't just destroy your father's business. He destroyed your father's reputation based on lies. Your father had Vincent Torino investigated for fraud that didn't exist, had evidence planted that implicated him in construction safety violations he never committed, and had media outlets report allegations that were completely manufactured, Elena confirmed, her voice carrying the clinical precision of someone who'd spent years documenting every detail of her father's destruction. And when the truth came out? The truth never came out, Elena said bitterly. Vincent Torino died believing he'd actually committed the crimes he was accused of, believing he'd actually endangered workers and cheated clients, believing he deserved the destruction that consumed his life. The weight of his father's crimes settled over Alexander like a burial shroud. He'd inherited an empire built not just on aggressive business practices, but on deliberate destruction of innocent people through manufactured scandals and planted evidence. The documents in the safe, Alexander said slowly, they prove my father's guilt. They prove 15 years of criminal fraud, conspiracy, and the destruction of 17 companies through fabricated allegations and planted evidence, Elena confirmed. Your father didn't just destroy my father, Alexander. He destroyed dozens of families through systematic criminal fraud disguised as legitimate business competition. Alexander felt his understanding of his family's legacy crumbling into something unrecognizable. And you've been gathering evidence for 7 years. I've been documenting every crime, every fabricated scandal, every family destroyed by Corleone Industries' criminal practices, Elena replied. The documents in that safe are just the beginning of what I can prove about your family's business methods. Before Alexander could respond, the sound of footsteps in the mansion's main corridor indicated that they were no longer alone. Elena's expression shifted to something approaching panic as she realized their confrontation had been discovered. Alexander? Came his daughter's voice from the hallway, innocent and confused. Why is Miss Isabella in Daddy's study so late? Alexander and Elena stared at each other across the study, both understanding that 6-year-old Emma was about to walk into the middle of a confrontation that would either destroy her family or destroy the woman she'd learned to love as a mother figure. Emma, go back to bed, sweetheart, Alexander called, trying to keep his voice calm while Elena's gun remained trained on his chest. But Emma appeared in the doorway wearing pajamas covered with unicorns, her expression shifting from confusion to fear as she processed the scene in front of her. Miss Isabella, why do you have a gun? Emma asked with the innocent directness that cut through all adult complexity. Elena looked at the child she'd been caring for while planning to destroy her family, and Alexander saw something break inside the woman whose mission of revenge had been complicated by love she'd never anticipated feeling. Because sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices, Elena said gently, lowering the weapon as maternal instincts overwhelmed whatever plan she'd been executing. Are you a bad person? Emma asked, moving toward Elena with the fearless trust of a child who'd never doubted that her nanny would protect her from anything dangerous. I don't know anymore, sweetheart, Elena replied, kneeling to Emma's level while keeping the gun pointed away from the child who'd accidentally derailed her mission of revenge. But as Elena knelt beside Emma, as Alexander watched the woman he loved struggle between vengeance and the maternal love she'd developed for his daughter, footsteps in the corridor multiplied and voices indicated that their private confrontation was about to become something much more public and dangerous. Sir, we have intruders in the main house, came the voice of Alexander's head of security. Armed individuals, unknown intentions, coordinated breach. Alexander realized that Elena's confrontation wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of something larger, more coordinated, more dangerous than simple revenge against his family. "Elena," Alexander said urgently, "who else is here tonight?" Elena's face went white as she understood that her carefully planned mission had been complicated by forces beyond her control. "I came alone," she said desperately. "Alexander, I swear to you, I came alone." But the sounds of tactical movement throughout the mansion suggested that Elena's mission of revenge had either been hijacked by people with their own agenda, or she'd been manipulated by forces that intended to use her access to the Corleone family for purposes that went far beyond simple justice for her father's destruction. As armed figures moved through the mansion toward the study where Alexander, Elena, and Emma were trapped between love and revenge, between truth and justice, between the past that had shaped their families and the future that would be determined by the choices they made in the next few minutes, Alexander realized the most dangerous revelation was yet to come. Elena Torino wasn't just Vincent Torino's daughter seeking revenge for her father's death. She was the key to exposing criminal activities that reached far beyond the Corleone family, and everyone in the mansion tonight was either there to protect those secrets or die trying to expose them. The armed men who burst into the study moved with military precision, but Alexander immediately recognized something that made his blood run colder than simple home invasion. They were wearing Corleone Industries security uniforms. "Mr. Corleone," the team leader said with professional deference that suggested this wasn't an attack but a containment operation. "We received reports of an intruder threatening you and your daughter." Alexander looked between Elena, who was still holding the gun with trembling hands, and his own security team, who were treating her like a legitimate threat rather than the woman who'd been caring for Emma for 18 months. "Stand down," Alexander commanded, but the team leader's expression suggested he was following orders that superseded Alexander's authority. "Sir, we have instructions from Mr. Edmund Corleone to secure any threats to family safety," the team leader replied, referring to Alexander's father with a formality that suggested Edmund was personally coordinating this operation. Elena's face went white as she understood that her confrontation with Alexander had been anticipated, monitored, and was now being controlled by forces she hadn't accounted for in 7 years of planning. "Your father knows who I am," Elena realized, her voice carrying the devastating understanding that her secret identity had been compromised before she'd ever entered the Corleone household. Alexander felt ice flood his veins as implications crashed over him. "How long has my father known?" "Long enough to let me get close to you and Emma," Elena said, pieces clicking into place with terrifying clarity. "Long enough to document everything I've done, everything I've planned, everyone I've contacted in building my case against your family." The weight of manipulation that went far beyond Elena's mission of revenge settled over the study like a death sentence. Alexander realized that his father hadn't just been unaware of Elena's true identity. He'd been allowing her access to gather evidence that could be used against her when the time was right. "Daddy!" Emma's voice cut through the adult tension with innocent confusion. "Why are there so many people with guns in our house?" Alexander knelt beside his daughter, his heart breaking as he processed that Emma's entire relationship with Elena had been built on lies, federal surveillance, and family conspiracies that a 6-year-old couldn't possibly understand. "Emma, sweetheart, Miss Isabella needs to talk to some other adults about grown-up problems," Alexander said gently, trying to protect his daughter from the collapse of everything she'd trusted. "Is Miss Isabella going away?" Emma asked, unconsciously voicing the question that cut through Alexander's chest like a knife. Elena looked at the child she'd genuinely learned to love despite her mission of revenge, and Alexander saw tears streaming down her face as she realized that destroying his family would also destroy Emma's sense of safety and trust. "I don't know, sweetheart," Elena whispered, "but I want you to know that everything I feel for you, every story I've read you, every time I've taken care of you, that was all real." Before Emma could respond, Edmund Corleone entered the study with the commanding presence of a man accustomed to controlling outcomes and managing crises through strategic calculation rather than emotional reaction. "Elena Torino," Edmund said with casual familiarity. "Or should I say Agent Elena Torino, Federal Bureau of Investigation, undercover for 3 years investigating organized crime connections to legitimate business enterprises?" The revelation hit everyone in the room like lightning. Elena wasn't just Vincent Torino's daughter seeking revenge. She was a federal agent conducting an investigation that had positioned her in the Corleone household under official law enforcement authority. "Your FBI," Alexander said, staring at the woman he'd loved in secret for months while she'd been gathering evidence for federal prosecution of his family. I was FBI, Elena corrected, her voice carrying complexity that suggested her federal assignment had been complicated by emotions she'd never anticipated. Until I realized that the investigation was more about protecting certain criminal enterprises than prosecuting them. Edmund's expression shifted to something approaching amusement as he processed Elena's confession. Agent Torino, are you suggesting that federal law enforcement has been selectively investigating organized crime based on political considerations rather than evidence of actual criminal activity? I'm suggesting that 3 years of investigation revealed coordination between federal agencies and criminal organizations that made prosecuting some enterprises politically impossible. Elena replied with the clinical precision of someone who'd documented systematic corruption. Alexander felt his understanding of the situation tilting as layers of deception revealed themselves. Elena, what exactly have you discovered about my family's business practices? Elena looked between Edmund, who was clearly enjoying the revelation of federal corruption, and Alexander, who deserved the truth despite the personal cost of hearing it. Corleone Industries has been serving as a front for money laundering operations that fund political campaigns, federal agencies, and judicial appointments, Elena announced, her voice carrying 3 years of accumulated evidence and growing moral conflict. The construction companies your father destroyed weren't just business competitors. They were legitimate enterprises that refused to participate in money laundering schemes that your family was coordinating with federal oversight. Edmund clapped his hands with genuine appreciation for Elena's investigative thoroughness. Excellent work, Agent Torino. Though I should mention that you've been working for us the entire time. The silence that followed was deafening as Elena processed the scope of how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. What do you mean? Elena demanded. The FBI assignment that positioned you in our household was requested by Corleone Industries Security Division, Edmund explained with the satisfaction of someone whose long-term planning was finally being revealed. We needed a federal agent with personal motivation to investigate our competitors while inadvertently documenting the federal corruption that threatens our legitimate business interests. Alexander stared at his father, understanding that Elena's mission of revenge, her federal investigation, and even their romantic relationship had been orchestrated by family security operations that went far deeper than he'd ever suspected. You used her, Alexander said, rage building in his voice. You used her grief over her father's death, her dedication to justice, her federal authority. All of it to advance our family's business interests. I used her expertise to document criminal activities that were threatening our ability to operate legitimate business enterprises, Edmund corrected calmly. Agent Torino's investigation has provided comprehensive evidence of federal corruption, organized crime infiltration of law enforcement agencies, and political manipulation that serves our legal defense against future prosecution. Elena was staring at documents Edmund had produced that showed her federal assignment, her investigative priorities, and the strategic objectives that had guided her work for 3 years. My father's death, Elena said slowly. Vincent Torino's suicide. The construction fraud that destroyed his company. It was all legitimate. Vincent Torino's company was destroyed because he discovered federal agencies were using construction projects to launder money for organized crime networks, Edmund confirmed. He was eliminated because he threatened to expose corruption that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement. The weight of truth that was more complex than simple revenge or family loyalty crashed over Elena like ice water. Her father hadn't been an innocent victim of business competition. He'd been a whistleblower who'd been silenced for threatening federal criminal operations. And I've been investigating the wrong people, Elena realized. You've been investigating the people who killed your father while working for the people who ordered his death, Edmund replied with clinical precision. Agent Torino, your FBI handlers have been feeding you intelligence designed to focus your investigation on legitimate businesses rather than the federal agents who coordinate with organized crime. Emma was listening to adult conversations with the serious expression of a child trying to understand why everyone seemed upset about things she couldn't comprehend. Miss Isabella, Emma said quietly, are you sad because of your daddy too? Elena knelt beside Emma, her heart breaking as she realized that her mission of revenge had been based on lies that went much deeper than family business rivalries. Yes, sweetheart, Elena said gently. I'm sad because I've been confused about what happened to my daddy, and I said some things to your daddy that weren't very nice. Do you still love us? Emma asked with the directness that cut through all adult complexity. Elena looked at Alexander, seeing not just the target of her misdirected revenge, but the man who'd shown her what love could feel like when it wasn't built on deception and professional manipulation. "I love you more than anything in the world," Elena said to Emma, then looked at Alexander with eyes that held 18 months of accumulated truth despite the lies that had brought them together. "And I love your daddy more than I ever thought I could love anyone." Alexander felt his anger at federal manipulation and family orchestration dissolving into something more powerful. The understanding that what he'd built with Elena had survived deception, investigation, and the revelation that their entire relationship had been shaped by forces beyond their control. "Elena Torino," Alexander said quietly, "FBI agent, daughter of a murdered whistleblower, and the woman I've fallen in love with despite every reason to question her motives. Do you want to help me find out who really killed your father?" Elena's smile was radiant despite the tears streaming down her face. "Alexander Corleone, billionaire heir, target of federal investigation, and the man who's made me believe in something beyond mission objectives and professional duty, yes." But as they prepared to unite against the federal corruption that had killed Elena's father and manipulated her investigation, as Edmund watched his son choose love over family loyalty, as Emma held onto both Elena and Alexander with the fierce grip of a child protecting her family, none of them noticed the small recording device that had been documenting their entire conversation. The federal agents who'd been using Elena's investigation to protect their own criminal enterprises were about to discover that their careful manipulation had accidentally created something much more dangerous than a single undercover operative. They'd created a family united by love and committed to exposing the truth, regardless of what powerful forces demanded their silence. The explosion that rocked the Corleone estate 15 minutes later wasn't an accident, and it wasn't an attack by external enemies. It was Edmund Corleone eliminating evidence that could expose federal corruption reaching into the highest levels of government. "Everyone down!" Alexander shouted, throwing himself over Emma as debris from the study's reinforced windows showered the room where they'd been processing revelations that threatened to reshape American law enforcement. But Elena was already moving with tactical precision that revealed her FBI training, checking exits and communication lines while calculating threats that went beyond simple building damage. "Edmund," Elena called to Alexander's father, who was calmly destroying files despite the chaos erupting around them. "What did you just blow up?" "The server room that contained 3 years of your investigative reports," Edmund replied with satisfaction that suggested the explosion had been precisely planned rather than defensive reaction. "Along with all evidence of federal coordination with organized crime networks that your investigation had been documenting." Alexander felt ice flood his veins as he understood the scope of what his father had just destroyed. "You eliminated Elena's evidence of federal corruption?" "I eliminated evidence that could implicate our family in federal corruption charges," Edmund corrected, his voice carrying the ruthless pragmatism that had built the Corleone empire. "Alexander, Agent Torino's investigation was more thorough than anyone anticipated. She'd documented financial connections that could destroy legitimate businesses, along with criminal enterprises." Elena was staring at smoke rising from what had been months of careful documentation, understanding that her father's murder investigation had just been erased along with the evidence that could bring his killers to justice. 3 years of work," Elena said quietly, her voice carrying devastation that went beyond professional setback into personal betrayal. 3 years of documenting criminal activities, gathering testimony from witnesses, building cases against the people who killed my father. 3 years of creating liability that could destroy everyone in this room," Edmund replied without sympathy. "Agent Torino, your investigation was compromised from the beginning. The federal agents directing your work were protecting the very criminals you thought you were exposing." Before Elena could respond, communication equipment throughout the mansion activated with emergency transmissions that made everyone's situation exponentially more dangerous. "All units, contain and secure," came the announcement over federal frequencies. "Priority Alpha termination authorized for Agent Torino and all witnesses to compromised operations." Alexander felt his world tilting as he understood that federal agents weren't coming to extract Elena or protect his family. They were coming to eliminate everyone who'd learned about corruption that reached into law enforcement agencies. "They're going to kill us," Elena realized, her training kicking in as she calculated tactical options for protecting Alexander and Emma from federal assassination teams. "All of us. Anyone who knows about the money laundering operations, the political coordination, the judicial appointments, were all security risks now. Edmund was activating private security protocols that transformed the Corleone estate from family home into fortress. Alexander, take Elena and Emma to the safe room. The federal agents approaching this facility aren't here for arrest and prosecution. Where are you going? Alexander demanded as his father headed toward communications equipment that suggested he'd been planning for this exact scenario. I'm activating protocols that will ensure your survival and Elena's vindication, Edmund replied, his voice carrying finality that suggested he wouldn't be joining them in whatever came next. Elena was gathering emergency supplies while monitoring federal tactical frequencies that carried increasingly urgent discussions about eliminating witnesses to federal criminal operations. Alexander, Elena said urgently, your father isn't just protecting us from federal retaliation. He's positioning himself to take responsibility for criminal activities that implicate people much more powerful than your family. What do you mean? I mean, Edmund Corleone is preparing to become the fall guy for corruption that reaches into congressional oversight committees, federal judicial appointments, and intelligence agency operations that fund themselves through organized crime coordination. Alexander stared at his father, seeing the man who'd shaped his understanding of business success and family loyalty, preparing to sacrifice himself to protect people he loved from consequences of criminal activities they'd never chosen to participate in. Dad, Alexander said quietly, you don't have to do this. Edmund's smile was gentle despite the circumstances. Alexander, your grandfather built this empire through legitimate business practices and strategic thinking. Your father expanded it through cooperation with federal agencies that gradually corrupted those business practices into criminal facilitation. And you're going to restore it through exposure of corruption and return to legitimate operations. How? Elena's investigation documented everything, Edmund replied. Not just our family's participation in money laundering operations, but the federal agencies that coordinated those operations, the political figures who benefited from them, and the organized crime networks that were protected by law enforcement cooperation. Elena was reviewing files that Edmund had saved from the server destruction, understanding that Alexander's father had been planning this revelation for months. The evidence I gathered isn't destroyed, Elena realized. It's been copied, organized, and prepared for release to oversight committees that can't be corrupted by the agencies under investigation. Congressional intelligence oversight, international law enforcement cooperation, and media organizations that specialize in government corruption, Edmund confirmed. Agent Torino, your investigation is about to become the largest exposure of federal criminal activity in American history. Emma was clinging to Alexander with the frightened grip of a child who understood that dangerous things were happening, but couldn't comprehend why adults she trusted were talking about people being killed. Daddy, Emma said quietly, are the bad people going to hurt Miss Isabella? No, sweetheart, Alexander replied with fierce conviction. No one is going to hurt Miss Isabella. Or you. Or anyone in our family. But as federal tactical teams surrounded the Corleone estate, as Elena's evidence was transmitted to oversight committees that would either expose federal corruption or be silenced by the agencies under investigation, as Edmund prepared to face consequences for criminal activities he'd participated in to protect his family, Alexander realized the most dangerous revelation was yet to come. Elena Torino hadn't just been investigating federal corruption as an undercover FBI agent. She'd been recruited by international intelligence services to document American law enforcement cooperation with organized crime networks that threatened global security. Elena, Alexander said slowly, pieces clicking into place with terrifying clarity. Who else knows about your investigation? What other agencies have been coordinating with your work? Elena's face went white as she understood that her FBI assignment had been part of something much larger than domestic law enforcement corruption. Interpol, Elena whispered. British intelligence. Canadian Federal Police. Alexander, my investigation was part of an international operation to document American agency cooperation with transnational organized crime. The weight of international intelligence coordination crashed over them like an avalanche. Elena's evidence wasn't just threatening federal agencies. It was threatening American sovereignty and international relationships that had been built on cooperation agreements spanning decades. Which means, Edmund said with grim satisfaction, Federal agencies can eliminate the witnesses without triggering international incident that would expose exactly what they're trying to hide. But as he activated communication equipment that connected him to international oversight authorities, as Elena's evidence was transmitted to intelligence agencies across multiple countries, as Alexander and Emma prepared to either survive federal retaliation or become casualties of corruption that reached into the highest levels of American government, none of them anticipated the final twist that would transform their fight for survival into something unprecedented. The organized crime networks being exposed by Elena's investigation weren't being protected by federal agencies. They were being controlled by federal agencies as off-books funding mechanisms for intelligence operations that Congress had refused to authorize. The corruption Elena had documented wasn't just criminal activity disguised as law enforcement. It was law enforcement using criminal activity to fund operations that protected American national security through methods that violated every constitutional principle the country was founded on. The federal tactical teams that breached the Corleone estate weren't there to arrest anyone. They were there to stage a home invasion gone wrong that would eliminate witnesses while providing cover for the deaths of everyone who'd learned about intelligence agency cooperation with organized crime networks. Multiple breach points, coordinated assault, shoot-to-kill authorization, Elena reported, monitoring federal frequencies from the estate's reinforced safe room while Alexander held Emma and calculated their chances of survival against their own government. But the voice that came through the estate's communication system belonged to someone none of them had expected to hear. Alexander, Elena, this is Director Sarah Connor, International Intelligence Oversight Committee. Came the announcement that made Elena's eyes widen with recognition. You have 60 seconds to surrender peacefully before federal agents eliminate you as security threats. Elena was staring at communication equipment with growing understanding. Director Connor isn't here to eliminate us. She's here to extract us. How do you know? Alexander demanded, holding Emma while tactical teams moved through his family's mansion with lethal precision. Because Director Connor recruited me for international intelligence operations 3 years ago, Elena replied, revealing another layer of her true assignment that complicated everything they thought they understood. My FBI cover was arranged by international oversight committees investigating American intelligence agency corruption. Alexander felt his understanding of Elena's identity shifting again as implications crashed over him. You're not just FBI. You're international intelligence. I'm a joint operative working for oversight committees that monitor intelligence agency cooperation with criminal organizations, Elena confirmed, activating equipment that connected her to authorities who outranked the federal agents trying to kill them. Alexander, my mission was never about investigating your family. It was about using your family's connections to document how American agencies fund illegal operations through organized crime coordination. Before Alexander could process the full scope of how he'd been manipulated by international intelligence services, Edmund's voice came through the safe room's communication system with news that would either save them or complete their destruction. Alexander, Elena, the evidence transmission is complete, Edmund announced. Congressional oversight committees, international law enforcement agencies, and media organizations in 14 countries now have complete documentation of federal criminal operations spanning 23 years. And, Alexander asked, though he dreaded the answer. And federal agencies have been given ultimatum by international oversight authorities, Edmund replied with grim satisfaction. Stand down immediately and accept investigation, or face international sanctions that would cripple American intelligence operations worldwide. Elena was monitoring multiple frequencies as federal tactical teams received conflicting orders from different chains of command. They're arguing, Elena reported. Federal field teams are getting orders to eliminate witnesses, but their supervisors are getting orders from international authorities to stand down and cooperate with investigation. Which orders are they going to follow? Alexander asked, though Emma's frightened grip on his shirt reminded him that their daughter's safety was more important than understanding bureaucratic conflicts. The ones that keep them from being prosecuted for war crimes, Elena replied, showing him international warrant authorizations that would criminalize any federal agent who harmed witnesses under international protection. That's when Director Sarah Connor entered the safe room, not through tactical breach, but through security codes that suggested she'd been coordinating with Edmund for much longer than anyone had realized. Agent Torino, Director Connor said formally, report your operational status. Director Connor, Elena replied, standing at attention despite the emotional complexity of the situation. Mission parameters have been complicated by personal factors not anticipated in original briefing. Director Connor looked between Elena and Alexander, noting the obvious emotional connection that had developed despite the professional nature of Elena's assignment. Agent Torino, are you compromised? Director Connor asked directly. Elena looked at Alexander, seeing not just the target of her international intelligence mission, but the man who'd taught her that love could exist without deception, that trust could be built through honesty, that family could be chosen rather than assigned by oversight committees. Yes, Elena said simply. Completely compromised. And I wouldn't change anything about it. Director Connor's expression softened as she processed Elena's confession. Agent Torino, falling in love with your assignment wasn't part of operational parameters, but it also wasn't prohibited. What does that mean? Alexander demanded. It means Elena can choose to continue her international intelligence career or choose to build a life with you and Emma, Director Connor replied. The mission is complete. The evidence has been gathered. American intelligence agencies are now under international oversight that will prevent future criminal cooperation. But as relief flooded through the safe room, as federal tactical teams received stand-down orders from international authorities, as Elena's mission transformed from professional obligation into personal choice, Alexander realized the most important question hadn't been answered. What about my family's criminal participation? Alexander asked. What about the money laundering, the organized crime coordination, the legitimate businesses that were destroyed? Director Connor pulled out files that documented the full scope of international investigation into American intelligence corruption. Alexander, your family's participation in money laundering operations was documented and reported to international authorities as evidence of federal coercion rather than voluntary criminal activity, Director Connor explained. Corleone Industries was threatened with destruction unless it participated in operations that appeared to be business transactions, but were actually intelligence funding mechanisms. Elena was reviewing evidence that placed Alexander's family's activities in the context of systematic coercion by federal agencies. Your father's destruction of competitor companies wasn't business strategy, Elena realized. It was federal agencies using your family's resources to eliminate businesses that refused to participate in money laundering operations. Which means, Alexander asked, which means your family were victims of federal criminal coercion rather than willing participants in organized crime, Director Connor confirmed. The evidence Elena gathered supports immunity from prosecution in exchange for continued cooperation with international oversight of American intelligence operations. Emma was listening to adult conversations with the serious expression of a child, trying to understand why everyone seemed relieved about things that still sounded scary. Miss Isabella, Emma said quietly, are you still going to be my nanny? Elena knelt beside Emma, her heart breaking as she realized that her relationship with this child had been the most authentic part of an assignment built on deception and professional manipulation. Emma, sweetheart, I don't know what my job is going to be, Elena said honestly. But I know that I love you more than any job, and I want to be part of your family in whatever way your daddy thinks is best. Do you love daddy too? Emma asked with the directness that cut through all diplomatic complexity. Elena looked at Alexander, seeing 18 months of accumulated love that had survived federal investigation, international intelligence operations, and the revelation that their relationship had been shaped by forces neither of them had understood. I love your daddy more than I've ever loved anyone, Elena said simply. Alexander felt his heart breaking and healing simultaneously as he processed that Elena's love had been real despite the deception, authentic despite the professional manipulation, strong enough to survive the revelation of her true identity and mission. Elena Torino, Alexander said quietly, international intelligence agent, daughter of a murdered whistleblower, federal investigator, and the woman who's made me believe in love despite every reason to question motives and trust. Will you marry me? Elena's smile was radiant despite the tears streaming down her face. Alexander Corleone, billionaire heir, unwitting victim of federal coercion, target of international investigation, and the man who's taught me that love is more important than any mission, yes. Emma clapped her hands with delight that cut through the emotional complexity of adult relationships. Does this mean Miss Isabella gets to be my mommy? If she wants to be, Alexander said, looking at Elena with hope that had survived conspiracy, manipulation, and the revelation that their entire relationship had been shaped by international intelligence operations. "I want to be your mommy more than anything in the world," Elena said to Emma, then looked at Alexander with eyes that held no more secrets, no more divided loyalties, no more mission objectives that competed with family love. But as celebrations began in the Corleone estate safe room, as international oversight committees coordinated with federal agencies to reform intelligence operations, as Elena prepared to choose family over career and Alexander prepared to rebuild his empire through legitimate business practices, Director Connor's communication device activated with a priority transmission that reminded everyone why their victory might be temporary. "Director Connor, this is Agent David Mills, International Criminal Court," came the transmission that made everyone's blood run cold. "We have a problem with the American intelligence reform operation." "What kind of problem?" Director Connor asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer would complicate everything they'd just resolved. "The kind that suggests federal agencies have been operating criminal networks not just for funding, but for conducting operations that violate international law," Agent Mills replied. "The evidence Agent Torino gathered doesn't just document money laundering. It documents war crimes disguised as intelligence operations. The weight of implications that reached beyond American law enforcement into territory that threatened international stability crashed over them like an avalanche." Elena was staring at evidence files with growing horror as she understood the full scope of what she'd accidentally uncovered. "Alexander," Elena said quietly, "the organized crime networks your family was forced to participate in weren't just funding intelligence operations." "What were they doing?" Alexander asked, though he dreaded the answer. "They were providing cover for international assassinations, political destabilization operations, and arms trafficking that violated treaties governing intelligence agency cooperation," Elena replied, her voice carrying the weight of discoveries that went far beyond anything she'd been trained to investigate. Director Connor was already coordinating with international authorities who would either contain the scandal or allow it to trigger diplomatic crisis between allied nations. "Agent Torino," Director Connor said formally, "your investigation has uncovered evidence of systematic violation of international law by American intelligence agencies. This evidence must be contained until diplomatic solutions can be coordinated, or it will trigger sanctions that could collapse intelligence cooperation between allied nations." Elena looked between the International Oversight Authority who'd shaped her career and the family she'd chosen to love despite professional obligations. "Director Connor," Elena said with absolute conviction, "I choose family over diplomatic convenience. If American agencies have been committing war crimes, the evidence needs to be released regardless of political consequences. Even if releasing that evidence triggers diplomatic crisis that destabilizes international security?" Director Connor asked. Elena looked at Alexander and Emma, seeing the people whose love had taught her that some principles were more important than political stability or career advancement. "Especially then," Elena said simply, "as international intelligence agencies prepared to either expose or contain evidence of American war crimes, as Elena chose truth over diplomatic convenience, as Alexander and Emma prepared to support the woman they loved regardless of the personal cost. They realized their love story was about to become the foundation for either international justice or international crisis. But they also realized that some choices were worth making regardless of the consequences. Because love built on truth was stronger than any government's ability to manipulate or control. The War Crimes Tribunal that convened in Elena's evidence files wasn't theoretical. It was happening in real time as international oversight committees processed documentation that would either trigger the largest intelligence scandal in modern history or be buried through diplomatic pressure that reached into every allied government. 23 countries affected by American intelligence operations that violated international law, Elena reported, reviewing evidence that had accidentally uncovered during her investigation of organized crime funding. Political assassinations disguised as criminal violence, arms trafficking that violated UN sanctions, election interference that destroyed democratic processes in allied nations. Alexander was holding Emma while processing that his family's forced cooperation with federal agencies had inadvertently facilitated war crimes that reached into governments worldwide. The construction companies my father destroyed, Alexander realized. They weren't just refusing to participate in money laundering. They were refusing to provide cover for international operations that violated treaties governing intelligence cooperation. Vincent Torino discovered that construction projects were being used to move weapons, conceal surveillance equipment, and provide operational cover for assassination teams, Elena confirmed, her voice carrying the weight of understanding why her father had been murdered for threatening to expose activities that went far beyond domestic criminal cooperation. Director Connor was coordinating with authorities from 14 countries, while calculating whether exposing American war crimes would strengthen international law or trigger diplomatic crisis that weakened Allied cooperation against legitimate security threats. Agent Torino, Director Connor said formally, the evidence you've gathered could either reform intelligence operations worldwide or destroy intelligence cooperation that protects millions of people from terrorism, foreign aggression, and organized crime networks that operate across international borders. Director Connor, Elena replied with conviction that had been building since she'd chosen family over career objectives. Protecting people from legitimate threats doesn't justify protecting agencies that have become threats themselves. Before Director Connor could respond, Edmund Corleone entered the safe room with news that would either vindicate Elena's choice or confirm that exposing war crimes would trigger consequences none of them had anticipated. The evidence release has begun, Edmund announced, showing them real-time media coverage of intelligence scandals that were spreading across international news networks like wildfire. Congressional oversight committees, international criminal courts, and media organizations in 23 countries are simultaneously exposing American intelligence coordination with war crimes spanning 15 years. Alexander felt his world tilting as he processed the scope of what Elena's investigation had triggered. This isn't just about reforming intelligence operations. This is about fundamentally changing how allied nations conduct security operations. This is about ensuring that intelligence agencies serve democratic principles instead of serving themselves through criminal activities that violate the laws they're supposed to protect, Elena corrected, watching international reaction to evidence that documented systematic violation of treaties governing intelligence cooperation. Emma was coloring pictures with the focused concentration of a child who'd learned that adults sometimes discuss scary things that required her to stay calm and quiet while important decisions were made. Miss Isabella, Emma said without looking up from her artwork, are people going to be angry about the things you found out? Some people are going to be very angry, sweetheart, Elena replied honestly. But other people are going to be grateful that someone finally told the truth about bad things that were happening in secret. Are you scared? Emma asked with the directness that continued to cut through diplomatic complexity. Elena looked at Alexander, seeing not just the man she'd fallen in love with, but the partner who would help her face whatever consequences resulted from choosing truth over political convenience. I'm not scared anymore, Elena said simply, because I have a family now, and families protect each other no matter what happens. But as international reactions to Elena's evidence release developed, as congressional oversight committees initiated investigations that would reshape American intelligence operations, as allied governments calculated whether to support intelligence reform or oppose revelations that threatened their own security operations, Director Connor's communication equipment activated with a transmission that made everyone's situation exponentially more complex. Director Connor, this is Secretary of State Jennifer Morrison, came the announcement that carried authority that superseded international oversight committees. The intelligence evidence release must be contained immediately, or it will trigger diplomatic crisis that threatens NATO alliance structures and UN security cooperation agreements. Elena felt ice flood her veins as she understood that exposing American war crimes was threatening international relationships that protected global security. Secretary Morrison, Director Connor replied carefully, the evidence release is already underway through international oversight committees that operate independently of American diplomatic authority. Director Connor, American intelligence operations that violated international law were conducted in cooperation with Allied intelligence services, Secretary Morrison said with chilling implications. Exposing American war crimes will simultaneously expose British, Canadian, Australian, and European intelligence cooperation with activities that violated their own domestic laws. The weight of international intelligence cooperation in war crimes crashed over the safe room like an avalanche. Elena's evidence hadn't just exposed American agency violations. It had exposed systematic violation of international law by intelligence services throughout the Allied democratic world. The organized crime networks weren't just funding American operations, Elena realized with growing horror. They were funding intelligence cooperation between allied nations that couldn't be officially acknowledged. Money laundering operations provided off-books funding for intelligence cooperation that violated democratic oversight in every participating country, Director Connor confirmed grimly. Elena, your investigation has uncovered evidence that democratic governments worldwide have been using criminal networks to fund operations their own legislative bodies would never authorize. Alexander stared at evidence that revealed the scope of international intelligence cooperation that had been hidden from democratic oversight for decades. This isn't just about American war crimes, Alexander said slowly. This is about discovering that allied democratic governments have been systematically violating their own constitutions through criminal cooperation disguised as security operations. Which means exposing the evidence could either strengthen democratic accountability or destroy democratic governments that have been operating outside legal authority, Elena added, understanding the terrible complexity of the choice she'd made. Emma was listening to adult conversations with the serious expression of a child who understood that grown-ups were discussing things that would affect her family's future. Daddy, Emma said quietly, if Miss Isabella did the right thing, why do people want her to stop? Alexander knelt beside his daughter, his heart breaking as he tried to explain moral complexity that adults struggled to navigate. Sometimes doing the right thing makes other people angry because they were doing wrong things and they don't want to get in trouble, Alexander explained gently. But if they were doing wrong things, shouldn't they get in trouble? Emma asked with the moral clarity that only children possessed. Yes, sweetheart, Elena said firmly. They should get in trouble. And that's why I told the truth about what they were doing, even though it makes them angry. But as international diplomatic pressure mounted to contain Elena's evidence release, as allied governments calculated whether to acknowledge intelligence cooperation violations or deny activities that could trigger constitutional crises, Secretary Morrison's next transmission revealed the true scope of what Elena's investigation had uncovered. Director Connor, Agent Torino, Secretary Morrison announced, the intelligence evidence you've released has triggered demands for war crimes prosecution of sitting government officials in 12 allied nations. If these prosecutions proceed, they will collapse governments and terminate security cooperation agreements that protect global democratic stability. Elena felt the weight of unintended consequences crushing down on her as she understood that exposing war crimes might trigger political instability that weakened democratic governments against legitimate security threats. Secretary Morrison, Elena said, her voice carrying conviction despite the terrible complexity of the situation. Protecting democratic governments requires ensuring those governments operate within democratic law. If exposing violations causes instability, that instability is the consequence of the violations, not the consequence of the exposure. Agent Torino, are you prepared to accept responsibility for diplomatic crisis that could weaken global democratic cooperation against authoritarian threats? Secretary Morrison asked. Elena looked at Alexander and Emma, seeing the family that had taught her the difference between serving institutions and serving principles, between protecting systems and protecting people. Secretary Morrison, Elena said with absolute clarity, I'm prepared to accept responsibility for ensuring that democratic governments actually operate democratically, regardless of what authoritarian threats use that accountability to their advantage. The silence that followed carried the weight of choices that would either strengthen democratic accountability worldwide or trigger political instability that authoritarians could exploit to weaken democratic institutions. But as Elena faced pressure from the highest levels of government to contain evidence that could reshape international relations, as Alexander prepared to support the woman he loved regardless of political consequences, as Emma held onto both of them with the fierce grip of a child protecting her chosen family, they realized something that would guide them through whatever came next. Love built on truth was strong enough to face any consequence, survive any pressure, and overcome any force that tried to separate them. Even if that force was the combined diplomatic pressure of every democratic government in the world. Because some principles were worth defending regardless of the personal cost. And sometimes, defending those principles required ordinary people to make choices that changed the world. 72 hours later. The international arrest warrant for Elena Torino wasn't issued by criminal courts. It was issued by a joint tribunal of allied intelligence agencies that had decided exposing their war crimes was itself an act of terrorism against democratic stability. Interpol Red Notice active in 47 countries. Alexander reported from secure communication equipment in the safe house, where they'd been hiding since Elena's evidence release had triggered the largest intelligence scandal in modern history. Elena, they're not trying to prosecute you for espionage. They're trying to prosecute you for treason against the international democratic order. Elena was monitoring global reactions to war crimes revelations that had collapsed 3 governments and triggered constitutional crises in 7 countries. Watching her choice to expose truth create exactly the political instability that opponents had warned would weaken democratic institutions. 12 allied nations have withdrawn from intelligence cooperation agreements, Elena said, her voice carrying the weight of unintended consequences that threatened global security. NATO intelligence sharing suspended. UN security cooperation terminated. International counterterrorism coordination dissolved. Alexander felt sick as he processed that Elena's exposure of war crimes was dismantling the international cooperation that protected democratic nations from legitimate security threats. The evidence you released was accurate, Alexander said quietly, but the consequences are exactly what they warned us about. Authoritarian governments are using the intelligence scandal to justify withdrawal from international law, suspension of democratic oversight, and elimination of press freedoms, Elena confirmed, reviewing reports that showed how dictatorships worldwide were exploiting democratic accountability to strengthen their own oppressive systems. Emma was coloring pictures with the focused determination of a 6-year-old who'd been told that grown-ups were discussing very important things that would determine whether their family could stay together. Miss Isabella, Emma said without looking up from her artwork, why are the people on TV saying bad things about you? Elena's heart broke as she realized that her choice to expose truth had made her an international fugitive whose continued presence in Emma's life put the child in danger from intelligence agencies that operated outside legal constraint. Because sometimes when you tell the truth about bad things, the people who were doing the bad things get angry and try to blame you for the problems they caused, Elena explained gently. But you didn't cause the problems, Emma said with the moral clarity that cut through all diplomatic complexity. You just told people about problems that were already happening. That's right, sweetheart, Elena said, tears streaming down her face as she understood that Emma saw the situation more clearly than any government official or intelligence analyst. But before Emma could ask more questions, Director Sarah Connor entered the safe house with news that would either provide hope or confirm that Elena's choice had doomed everyone she loved. Agent Torino, Director Connor announced, the International Criminal Court has issued a decision regarding the war crimes evidence you've exposed. And, Alexander asked, holding Emma while calculating whether they would need to run again or could finally stop hiding. The court has determined that exposure of systematic war crimes by intelligence agencies serves international law regardless of political consequences, Director Connor replied, showing them documents that legitimized Elena's choice. Prosecution of intelligence officials will proceed despite diplomatic pressure from allied governments. Elena felt hope stirring in her chest for the first time since learning that her evidence release had triggered international crisis. The war crimes prosecutions are moving forward? Elena asked. 43 intelligence officials from 12 countries will face international prosecution for systematic violation of treaties governing intelligence operations, Director Connor confirmed. Agent Torino, your investigation has been deemed essential to protecting international law from intelligence agencies that had begun operating outside legal authority. But as relief flooded through the safe house, Director Connor's expression indicated that legal vindication hadn't eliminated the dangers they faced. However, Director Connor continued, intelligence agencies that refuse to accept international prosecution authority have activated elimination protocols for witnesses whose testimony could implicate additional officials. Alexander felt ice flood his veins. They're still trying to kill us. Intelligence services that operate outside legal oversight have unlimited resources and no accountability constraints, Director Connor confirmed. Agent Torino's testimony could expose criminal activities that reach into the highest levels of government in allied nations. Those agencies have decided that eliminating witnesses is preferable to facing prosecution. Elena was reviewing threat assessments that showed coordinated operations by intelligence services from multiple countries to eliminate her before she could testify at international criminal proceedings. How many agencies? Elena asked. Enough, Director Connor replied grimly. And they're not operating under legal authority anymore. The intelligence officials facing prosecution have activated private contractors, criminal networks, and eliminated oversight protocols that normally constrain their activities. The weight of being hunted by intelligence agencies that had unlimited resources and no legal constraints crashed over them like a death sentence. "What about Emma?" Alexander demanded. "What about protecting my daughter from intelligence retaliation?" Director Connor's expression grew even more grim. "Mr. Corleone, Emma's connection to Agent Torino makes her a potential target for coercion operations designed to influence Elena's testimony or eliminate her motivation to appear at international criminal proceedings." Elena felt her world collapsing as she understood that loving Alexander and Emma had made them targets for intelligence retaliation that could destroy their lives. "I have to leave," Elena said quietly, the words cutting through her heart like knives. "I have to disappear before my presence puts Emma and Alexander in more danger." "No," Alexander said immediately, moving to stand between Elena and the door. "We face this together. All of us. As a family." "Alexander, they're going to use Emma against me," Elena said desperately. "Intelligence agencies that operate outside legal oversight will threaten her safety to prevent my testimony or eliminate my motivation to expose additional criminal activities. Then we eliminate the threat before they can use it," Alexander replied with the fierce determination of someone who'd found something worth fighting for regardless of the odds. "How?" Elena asked. "How do we fight intelligence agencies that have unlimited resources, no legal constraints, and coordination across multiple governments?" Before Alexander could answer, Edmund Corleone entered the safe house with news that would either save them all or confirm that their situation was hopeless. "By using resources they don't know we have," Edmund announced, showing them documentation that revealed the true scope of Corleone family capabilities. "Elena, your investigation exposed intelligence coordination with organized crime networks. What it didn't expose was legitimate business coordination with intelligence oversight authorities." Elena stared at documents that showed Corleone Industries had been cooperating with international oversight committees for decades, providing resources and intelligence that helped monitor intelligence agency activities for constitutional violations. "Your family has been working with oversight authorities to monitor intelligence agencies?" Elena asked. "The Corleone family has been serving as a check on intelligence agency overreach for 3 generations, Edmund confirmed. "We've been documenting activities, providing resources for investigation, and maintaining communication with oversight authorities specifically to prevent the kind of systematic violation of law that your investigation exposed." Alexander felt his understanding of his family's legacy shifting as he processed that their business empire had been serving democratic accountability rather than enabling criminal activity. "Which means we have resources to protect Elena's testimony and ensure her safety during international criminal proceedings," Edmund continued, revealing security capabilities that rivaled government operations. "And Emma?" Alexander asked. "Emma will be protected by security measures that intelligence agencies can't penetrate because they've been designed specifically to counter intelligence agency capabilities," Edmund replied. "But as plans develop to protect Elena's testimony and ensure Emma's safety, as the Corleone family revealed resources that could counter intelligence agency retaliation, Elena realized the most difficult choice was yet to come." "Alexander," Elena said quietly, "even if we can protect Emma and ensure my testimony, what happens after the criminal proceedings? What happens to us, to our relationship, to the family we were trying to build?" Alexander looked at the woman he'd fallen in love with despite every reason to question her motives, seeing not just the international intelligence agent or the war crimes witness, but the person who'd taught him that love was worth fighting for regardless of the personal cost. "We build a life that serves something bigger than ourselves," Alexander said simply. "We use our resources to protect other families from intelligence agencies that operate outside legal authority. We make sure that what happened to your father never happens to anyone else." Elena felt tears streaming down her face as she understood that their love had survived deception, investigation, international crisis, and the revelation that they were being hunted by intelligence agencies worldwide. "Even if it means spending our lives fighting forces that most people never know exist?" Elena asked. "Especially then," Alexander replied, pulling her into his arms while Emma held on to both of them with the fierce grip of a child who understood that families protected each other regardless of what dangers they faced. But as they prepared for international criminal proceedings that would either bring justice for war crimes or trigger their elimination by intelligence agencies operating outside legal oversight, as they planned to transform their survival into protection for other families facing similar threats, Director Connor's communication device activated with a priority transmission that would either confirm their hope or destroy it completely. Director Connor, this is Agent Lisa Park, International Criminal Court Security. Came the transmission that made everyone's blood run cold. We have credible intelligence that Allied intelligence agencies are planning coordinated elimination operation during Agent Torino's testimony. Recommend immediate relocation to secure facility with enhanced protection protocols. Elena felt the weight of international intelligence retaliation closing around them like a trap that had been building since she'd first chosen to expose war crimes rather than protect diplomatic convenience. They're going to try to kill me during my testimony, Elena realized. They're going to try to kill all of you, Director Connor corrected grimly. Intelligence agencies that face prosecution for war crimes have decided that eliminating witnesses publicly will demonstrate their continued capability while deterring future exposures of criminal activities. Alexander pulled Elena and Emma closer, understanding that their love story was about to face the ultimate test. Survival against intelligence agencies that would rather start a war than face accountability for the crimes Elena had exposed. But they also understood that some love was worth fighting for regardless of the odds. Even if that fight was against the combined intelligence resources of every Allied government in the world. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source. 6-year-old Emma's coloring book contained the key to defeating intelligence agencies that had unlimited resources and no legal constraints. Miss Isabella, Emma said, showing Elena a picture she'd drawn of their family surrounded by people in dark clothes. Why do the bad people always hide in the shadows? Elena stared at Emma's artwork, seeing not just a child's interpretation of their situation, but a tactical insight that had escaped international intelligence analysts. Because they can only operate if people don't know what they're doing, Elena realized, understanding blooming in her voice. Emma, you just figured out how to beat them. Alexander looked at his daughter's drawing, seeing stick figures representing their family, standing in bright sunshine while shadowy figures lurked at the edges of the picture. They need secrecy to function, Alexander said slowly. Intelligence agencies that operate outside legal oversight can only maintain their activities if those activities remain hidden from public scrutiny. Elena was already activating communication equipment that would either save their lives or ensure their destruction. Director Connor, I want to broadcast my testimony live to every news network, social media platform, and international oversight committee simultaneously. Agent Torino, Director Connor replied with alarm. Broadcasting war crimes testimony publicly would eliminate all security protocols designed to protect witnesses during international criminal proceedings. It would also eliminate intelligence agencies' ability to attack the proceedings without exposing their criminal activities to global public scrutiny, Elena countered, understanding that Emma's insight had identified the one strategy that intelligence agencies couldn't counter. Edmund was reviewing security protocols that would either protect public testimony or make them sitting targets for elimination operations. Elena's right, Edmund said with growing excitement. Intelligence agencies can attack classified proceedings without public knowledge, but they can't attack public testimony without revealing exactly what they're trying to hide. The elimination operation they're planning depends on secrecy, Alexander realized. If Elena's testimony is broadcast live to the entire world, attacking her means exposing their criminal activities to billions of people simultaneously. Director Connor was calculating whether public testimony would provide protection through transparency or simply give intelligence agencies a more visible target for elimination operations. Agent Torino, Director Connor said carefully, broadcasting your testimony would prevent intelligence agencies from attacking the proceedings secretly, but it wouldn't prevent them from attempting elimination operations during the broadcast, which would provide real-time documentation of intelligence agency assassination attempts in front of global audiences, Elena replied with conviction. Director Connor, they can kill me, but they can't kill me secretly if I'm testifying to the entire world. Emma was listening to adult conversations with the serious expression of a child who understood that her artwork had somehow helped solve a very important problem. Daddy, Emma said quietly, if Miss Isabella talks to everyone at the same time, the bad people can't hide anymore? That's right, sweetheart, Alexander confirmed, kneeling beside his daughter, who'd accidentally identified the strategy that could defeat intelligence agencies with unlimited resources. If everyone in the world is watching, the bad people have to choose between staying hidden and trying to hurt Miss Isabella. And if they try to hurt her while everyone is watching, then everyone will know they're bad people, Elena said gently, and other good people will be able to stop them. But as plans developed for public testimony that would either expose war crimes to global audiences or provide intelligence agencies with a public target for elimination operations, Director Connor's communication equipment activated with news that would either confirm their strategy or reveal its fatal flaw. Director Connor, this is Secretary of State Jennifer Morrison, came the transmission that carried authority from the highest levels of American government. Public testimony by Agent Torino must be prevented at all costs. The diplomatic consequences of exposing Allied intelligence cooperation in war crimes would destabilize international security for decades. Elena felt ice flood her veins as she understood that even legitimate government officials were opposing public testimony that would hold intelligence agencies accountable for criminal activities. Secretary Morrison, Director Connor replied carefully, Agent Torino's testimony serves international law enforcement and constitutional accountability. Agent Torino's testimony serves foreign adversaries who will use evidence of Allied intelligence cooperation to justify their own violations of international law, Secretary Morrison interrupted. Director Connor, public exposure of intelligence coordination will provide authoritarian governments with propaganda that undermines democratic legitimacy worldwide. Alexander felt the terrible complexity of international relations crushing down on them as he processed that exposing truth about democratic intelligence agencies might indeed strengthen authoritarian propaganda against democratic institutions. Elena, Alexander said quietly, are you prepared for the possibility that your testimony might be used by dictatorships to justify oppression of their own people? Elena looked at Emma, seeing the child whose innocent question had revealed the strategy for defeating intelligence agencies that operated outside legal oversight. Alexander, Elena replied with absolute conviction. Authoritarian governments already oppress their people and already ignore international law. Protecting democratic institutions requires ensuring those institutions actually operate democratically, regardless of what authoritarians claim about democratic accountability. Before anyone could respond, Edmund activated communication equipment that connected them to authorities who would either support public testimony or prevent it through force. International Criminal Court, this is Edmund Corleone representing Agent Elena Torino. Edmund announced with the authority of someone who'd been coordinating with oversight authorities for decades. Agent Torino requests immediate scheduling of public testimony regarding intelligence agency war crimes, with live broadcast to global media networks. The response came immediately. Mr. Corleone, public testimony approved by unanimous International Criminal Court vote. Agent Torino will testify tomorrow at 9 o'clock GMT with live broadcast to international media networks, social media platforms, and oversight committees in 47 countries. Elena felt hope and terror warring in her chest as she understood that her choice to expose war crimes publicly would either bring justice for her father's murder or result in her own elimination in front of global audiences. 24 hours, Alexander said, calculating the time they had to prepare for public testimony that would either expose intelligence agency war crimes or provide those agencies with an opportunity to eliminate Elena while the entire world watched. 24 hours to ensure that our family survives intelligence agency retaliation, Elena added, reviewing security protocols that would either protect public testimony or prove inadequate against elimination operations conducted by agencies with unlimited resources. Emma was coloring another picture, this one showing their family standing on a stage while millions of stick figures watched from below. Miss Isabella, Emma said with the innocent wisdom that had already provided the key to their survival, when you talk to everyone tomorrow, will you tell them about my daddy who was being forced to help the bad people? Elena felt tears streaming down her face as she realized that Emma understood not just the importance of public testimony, but the opportunity it provided to expose the full truth about her father's victimization by intelligence agencies. Yes, sweetheart, Elena said gently. I'll tell everyone how your daddy and grandfather were threatened by bad people who made them participate in things they didn't want to do. And will you tell them about your daddy who was killed for trying to stop the bad people? I'll tell them everything, Elena confirmed, understanding that Emma's questions had identified not just the strategy for survival, but the moral imperative that made survival worth fighting for. As they prepared for public testimony that would either expose war crimes to global audiences or result in their elimination by intelligence agencies that refused to accept legal accountability, as Emma's innocent insights provided the courage necessary to face forces that operated outside democratic oversight. As Alexander and Elena prepared to stand together against intelligence retaliation that could destroy them both, they realized something that would guide them through whatever came next. Truth spoken publicly was more powerful than any secret operation, any classified authority, any intelligence capability that depended on secrecy and lack of accountability. Their love had survived deception, investigation, international crisis, and the revelation that they were being hunted by intelligence agencies worldwide. Now it would become the foundation for exposing truth that could either reform intelligence operations globally or trigger their destruction by the very agencies they were committed to holding accountable. But they also understood that some truths were worth telling regardless of the personal consequences. Because love built on truth was stronger than any government's ability to silence or eliminate. The International Criminal Court Chamber had never hosted testimony broadcast live to 2.4 billion viewers. But as Elena Torino stepped to the witness stand wearing a simple blue dress that somehow carried more authority than any government uniform, the entire world held its breath. Agent Elena Torino, Chief Prosecutor David Miller announced, his voice carrying across satellites and streaming platforms to audiences in 47 countries. You are here to provide testimony regarding systematic violation of international law by intelligence agencies in allied democratic nations. Do you swear to tell the complete truth regardless of political consequences? Elena looked at the camera that would carry her words to global audiences, then at the secure viewing area where Alexander held Emma while they watched her choose truth over diplomatic convenience. I swear to tell the complete truth about war crimes committed by intelligence agencies, regardless of what governments demand my silence, Elena replied, her voice steady despite the knowledge that intelligence elimination teams were positioned throughout the facility. But as Elena began testimony that would either expose war crimes to global scrutiny or trigger her assassination in front of international audiences, the first interruption came not from intelligence agencies seeking to silence her, but from an unexpected source. Your Honor, announced defense attorney Sarah Williams, representing intelligence officials facing prosecution. The defense objects to public testimony on grounds that exposing classified intelligence operations threatens national security and violates treaties governing protection of state secrets. Chief Prosecutor Miller looked directly into the camera broadcasting to global audiences. Counselor Williams, this court operates under international law that prioritizes accountability for war crimes over protection of state secrets. The testimony will continue. Elena felt strength flowing through her as she understood that international law was supporting public accountability despite pressure from governments that preferred diplomatic secrecy. Agent Torino, Chief Prosecutor Miller continued, please describe how you discovered intelligence agency coordination with organized crime networks. Elena looked at the global audience that included oversight committees, media organizations, and ordinary citizens who deserved to know how their governments had been operating outside legal authority. My investigation began when my father, Vincent Torino, was murdered for discovering that construction projects were being used to facilitate money laundering operations that funded intelligence activities operating outside congressional oversight, Elena began, her voice carrying across continents to people who'd never understood how intelligence agencies actually functioned. As Elena's testimony continued, documenting years of war crimes disguised as intelligence operations, assassination teams positioned throughout the facility found themselves facing an impossible situation. Attacking Elena meant exposing intelligence agency criminal activities to audiences that included congressional oversight committees with the authority to terminate intelligence operations entirely. The organized crime networks weren't independent criminal enterprises, Elena continued, showing documentation to cameras that broadcast evidence to global audiences. They were intelligence assets providing off-books funding for operations that violated constitutional oversight in every participating democracy. But the most devastating revelation came when Elena addressed her relationship with the Corleone family directly. Alexander Corleone and his family were victims of intelligence agency coercion rather than willing participants in criminal activities, Elena testified, making eye contact with Alexander while speaking to global audiences. Corleone Industries was threatened with destruction unless it provided resources for operations that appeared to be legitimate business transactions, but were actually intelligence funding mechanisms. The relief that flooded across Alexander's face was visible to 2.4 billion viewers as Elena's testimony cleared his family of criminal participation while exposing the coercion that had shaped their business operations for decades. Agent Torino, Chief Prosecutor Miller said, "What evidence do you have that intelligence agencies committed war crimes through these operations?" Elena activated presentation equipment that displayed evidence to global audiences with the devastating clarity of someone who'd spent 3 years documenting systematic criminal activity. Political assassinations disguised as organized crime violence in 17 countries, Elena announced, showing documentation that made viewers worldwide gasp with recognition of events they'd assumed were criminal rather than intelligence operations. Arms trafficking that violated UN sanctions, conducted through construction projects that provided operational cover for weapons movement between conflict zones. Election interference operations that destroyed democratic processes in allied nations, funded through money laundering networks that provided untraceable financial resources. As evidence streamed to global audiences, as Elena's testimony exposed systematic violation of international law by intelligence agencies in democratic nations, the assassination teams positioned throughout the facility faced a strategic impossibility. Eliminating Elena required revealing exactly what she was exposing to audiences that included the democratic oversight authorities, who could terminate intelligence operations entirely. But the most powerful moment of Elena's testimony came when she addressed the global audience directly. The intelligence agencies that committed these war crimes are counting on public apathy, democratic fatigue, and the assumption that ordinary citizens can't understand or change intelligence operations, Elena said, looking directly into cameras that carried her words to billions of people. They're wrong. Democratic accountability requires citizens who demand that intelligence agencies serve constitutional law rather than serving themselves through criminal activities that violate the principles democracies were founded to protect. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with demands for intelligence reform. Congressional oversight committees activated emergency protocols for investigating intelligence agency violations, and international law enforcement agencies began coordinating prosecutions that would reshape intelligence operations globally. But as Elena's testimony concluded, as global audiences processed evidence that would trigger systematic reform of intelligence operations worldwide, the final revelation came from someone no one had expected. "Your Honor," announced Edmund Corleone, requesting permission to address the court, "I have additional testimony regarding intelligence agency coordination with organized crime networks." Chief Prosecutor Miller looked at Alexander's father with interest that suggested Edmund's testimony would either complete Elena's evidence or complicate it beyond resolution. "Mr. Corleone, you may proceed." Edmund stepped to the witness stand with documents that would either vindicate Elena's investigation or reveal complexities that challenged everything she'd exposed. "For 23 years, I have been working as an oversight asset for international law enforcement agencies investigating intelligence corruption," Edmund announced, his words hitting the courtroom like lightning. Elena stared at Edmund, understanding that Alexander's father hadn't been complicit in intelligence crimes. He'd been documenting them for prosecution by international authorities. The Corleone family's participation in money laundering operations was conducted under deep cover authorization from international oversight committees investigating systematic intelligence corruption. Edmund continued, showing documentation that revealed the scope of international cooperation in building the case Elena had accidentally completed. Agent Torino's investigation provided the final evidence necessary to prosecute intelligence officials who had been operating outside legal oversight for decades. Alexander felt his understanding of his family's legacy shifting as he processed that their business empire had been serving international law enforcement rather than enabling criminal activity. "Your Honor," Edmund said, addressing the global audience that included intelligence officials watching their careers end in real time. "The evidence Agent Torino has presented represents 23 years of systematic documentation by oversight authorities in 12 countries, coordinated to ensure that intelligence agencies serve democratic law rather than serving themselves through criminal enterprises." As global audiences processed that Elena's investigation had been the culmination of decades-long international oversight operations, as intelligence agency elimination teams realized their criminal activities had been documented by authorities with unlimited legal authority, as democratic governments worldwide implemented emergency protocols for reforming intelligence operations, Elena understood something that would guide the rest of her life. Truth supported by love was more powerful than any secret operation, any classified authority, any intelligence capability that operated outside democratic accountability. But the most important moment came when the testimony concluded and Alexander, Elena, and Emma were finally free to build the family they'd chosen despite every force that had tried to prevent it. Elena Torino, Alexander said as they left the International Criminal Court while global audiences celebrated the exposure of intelligence corruption, federal agent, international investigator, war crimes witness, and the woman who's taught me that some truths are worth fighting for regardless of the personal cost. Will you marry me in front of the same global audience that heard your testimony? Elena's smile was radiant as she understood that their love story had become the foundation for democratic accountability that would protect families worldwide from intelligence agencies that operated outside legal oversight. Alexander Corleone, Elena replied. Oversight asset, family protector, partner in justice, and the man who's shown me that love is stronger than any government's ability to manipulate or control, yes. Emma clapped her hands with delight that echoed across global media coverage of their engagement. Does this mean we get to have our wedding on TV too? If you want to, sweetheart, Elena said, understanding that public accountability had become the foundation for everything their family would build together. As global audiences celebrated not just the exposure of intelligence corruption, but the triumph of love over forces that had tried to separate them, as Elena and Alexander prepared to build a life dedicated to protecting other families from intelligence overreach, as Emma designed wedding invitations for a ceremony that would serve democratic transparency as much as personal happiness, they realized their love story had become something unprecedented. A family whose commitment to each other had accidentally triggered the largest reform of intelligence operations in modern history. Their love had survived deception, investigation, international crisis, and assassination attempts by intelligence agencies worldwide. Now it would become the foundation for ensuring that intelligence agencies served democratic principles instead of serving themselves through criminal activities that violated every value democratic societies were founded to protect. 1 year later, the wedding ceremony took place not in a private chapel, but in the same International Criminal Court chamber, where Elena's testimony had triggered the largest intelligence reform in modern history. Broadcast live to an audience that included oversight committees, reformed intelligence agencies, and families whose lives had been protected by the accountability Elena's courage had established. Elena Torino, Alexander said, his voice carrying across satellites and streaming platforms to audiences in 47 countries, federal agent, international investigator, war crimes witness, and the woman whose courage to speak truth changed the world. Do you take Alexander Corleone to be your husband in a partnership that serves justice as much as it serves love? I do, Elena replied, her voice steady despite tears of joy that carried 18 months of accumulated hope and the knowledge that their love had survived every force that had tried to destroy it. Alexander Corleone, Elena said, looking into eyes that held no more secrets, no more divided loyalties, no more mission objectives that competed with family commitment. Oversight asset, family protector, partner in justice, and the man who chose love over convenience regardless of the personal cost. Do you take Elena Torino to be your wife in a partnership that builds something beautiful from the truth we chose to tell together? I do, Alexander said simply, understanding that their marriage was about more than personal happiness. It was about commitment to principles that would guide their family's service to democratic accountability. Emma, serving as ring bearer in a dress that made her look like a princess, approached with rings that had been crafted from evidence recovered during intelligence agency prosecutions. Jewelry that served as symbol of truth transformed into beauty. Daddy, Miss Isabella, Emma said with the serious dignity of a 7-year-old who understood she was participating in something important. These rings are made from the bad things that good people turned into good things. The symbolism wasn't lost on global audiences as Elena and Alexander exchanged rings created from evidence of corruption that had been transformed into symbols of love and accountability. But the most powerful moment came when Chief Prosecutor David Miller, serving as officiating minister, addressed not just the bride and groom, but the global audience that had supported their journey from investigation to love to justice. Elena and Alexander, Chief Prosecutor Miller said, your love story began with deception, investigation, and the revelation that truth can be more dangerous than any lie. It becomes a marriage built on the understanding that some principles are worth defending regardless of what powerful forces demand your silence. He gestured toward cameras that carried their ceremony to audiences worldwide. Your commitment to each other has become a model for how democratic institutions can serve people instead of serving themselves, how love can triumph over manipulation, how ordinary families can change the world when they choose truth over convenience. As Elena and Alexander kissed for the first time as husband and wife, as global audiences celebrated not just their marriage, but the democratic accountability it represented, as Emma clapped with delight that echoed across continents, they understood that their love story had evolved into something unprecedented. A family whose commitment to each other had accidentally become the foundation for protecting democratic institutions from the very agencies designed to protect them. 5 years later, the Torino Corleone Foundation for Democratic Accountability operated from offices in Geneva that looked like a fusion of Elena's investigative expertise and Alexander's business acumen. But its real work happened in the families it protected from intelligence overreach worldwide. Final report on intelligence reform implementation, Elena announced, reviewing documentation that showed how dramatically international intelligence operations had changed since her testimony had exposed systematic war crimes. 47 countries have implemented constitutional oversight protocols for intelligence activities. Intelligence agency cooperation with organized crime networks terminated. Democratic accountability mechanisms established for all international intelligence coordination. Alexander was reviewing financial reports that showed how they'd transformed the Corleone business empire from unwitting participant in intelligence corruption into legitimate enterprise that funded democratic oversight operations. The foundation has protected 237 families from intelligence agency retaliation while documenting constitutional violations in 12 countries. Alexander reported with satisfaction that went beyond business success into service that honored their values. Emma, now 12 years old and somehow even more insightful than she'd been as a child, was working on homework that included writing essays about democratic accountability and constitutional protection. Mama Elena, Emma said, using the title she'd chosen when Elena officially adopted her 3 years earlier. My teacher wants to know why you decided to tell the truth even when it was dangerous. Elena looked up from oversight reports, seeing the young woman Emma was becoming. Someone who'd grown up understanding that ordinary people could change the world when they chose principle over convenience. Because some things are more important than personal safety, Elena replied gently. Truth, justice, protecting other families from the kinds of threats our family faced. Those things are worth fighting for regardless of what it costs us personally. Even when fighting means you might lose everything you love? Emma asked with the moral complexity that came from growing up in a family dedicated to democratic service. Especially then, Alexander added, joining the conversation while reviewing foundation business that had expanded to protect families worldwide. Emma, when we choose to fight for principles instead of fighting for personal advantage, we discover that we're stronger than any force that tries to stop us. Before Emma could ask more questions, their secure communication system activated with a priority transmission from families requesting protection assistance. Torino Corleone Foundation, this is Dr. Maria Santos in Barcelona, came the transmission that indicated their work continued across continents. We have a situation involving Spanish intelligence agency retaliation against a family whose father discovered constitutional violations in counterterrorism operations. Elena was already coordinating protection protocols while Alexander arranged financial resources that would ensure the Santos family received comprehensive assistance. Dr. Santos, protection teams are en route, Elena announced. Estimated arrival 40 minutes. Legal representation, secure relocation assistance, and constitutional advocacy support are being activated through our European Operations Center. Emma was listening to adult conversations with the engaged attention of a young woman who understood that family discussions often involved protecting people's constitutional rights. Are we going to help them? Emma asked. All of them, Alexander confirmed, understanding that their daughter had inherited values that would guide her own service to democratic accountability. Every family, every witness, Every person whose safety depends on constitutional protection from intelligence agencies that forget they serve democratic principles. As protection operations activated across multiple continents, as the Torino Corleone Foundation continued work that had grown from personal survival into systematic defense of democratic institutions, as Elena and Alexander coordinated resources that served justice as much as they served love, they reflected on the journey that had transformed their relationship into something that served purposes beyond personal happiness. Any regrets? Elena asked Alexander, echoing the question that had defined their relationship since learning their initial meeting had been shaped by intelligence investigation. Alexander considered the question seriously, thinking about the billionaire lifestyle they'd abandoned for democratic service. The simple family life that had been impossible once they'd become advocates for constitutional accountability. The comfortable privacy they'd traded for public responsibility that would continue for the rest of their lives. None, Alexander said firmly, looking around their home that served as headquarters for protecting constitutional rights worldwide. Elena, we've built something that serves families instead of serving institutions, that protects love instead of exploiting it, that chooses truth instead of choosing convenience. Even when choosing truth means our lives will always be complicated by the work we do. Elena asked. Especially then, Alexander replied, taking her hand and feeling the simple reality of their connection. No longer complicated by deception or investigation, but strengthened by shared commitment to principles that had guided them through every challenge. Emma was designing foundation logos for international operations that would expand their work into countries where democratic accountability needed protection from intelligence agencies that operated without constitutional oversight. Mama Elena, Daddy Alexander, Emma said with the matter-of-fact tone she'd inherited from growing up in a family that changed the world through ordinary choices. When I grow up, I want to help families like you helped our family. Elena felt tears streaming down her face as she realized that Emma had chosen to continue values that would protect democratic institutions for generations. Emma, Elena said gently, you're already helping families by showing them that children can grow up safe when adults choose to protect constitutional rights instead of exploiting them for personal advantage. As evening settled over Geneva, as the Torino Corleone Foundation prepared for another day of protecting families from intelligence overreach, as Elena and Alexander held each other close while planning operations that would serve democratic accountability across continents, they understood the final lesson their journey had taught them. Love built on truth was strong enough to survive any conspiracy, overcome any manipulation, and transform personal suffering into protection for everyone who needed the courage to choose justice over convenience. Their love story had begun with deception, federal investigation, and the revelation that intelligence agencies operated outside constitutional oversight. It had become the foundation for ensuring that democratic institutions served people instead of serving themselves, that intelligence agencies protected constitutional rights instead of violating them, and that families worldwide had resources to resist government overreach that threatened everything they loved. Elena Torino Corleone, Alexander said quietly as they watched Emma design protection protocols for families whose safety would depend on constitutional advocacy. What did our story teach you about love? It taught me that real love isn't about finding someone who fits into your existing life, Elena replied, seeing their daughter inherit values that would guide her own service to democratic principles. It's about building a new life together that serves something greater than personal happiness. And what did it teach you about family? That family isn't just the people you're born with or the people you choose to love, Elena said, looking around their home that served as sanctuary for families worldwide. Family is everyone who chooses to help you serve principles that protect other families from the forces that once threatened yours. As they prepared for another day of protecting constitutional rights from intelligence agencies that preferred secrecy to accountability, as they considered the requests for assistance that arrived daily from families who needed courage to resist government overreach, as they held each other close while planning operations that would reshape international law enforcement, Elena and Alexander understood something about love that had guided them through every challenge. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is fall in love with someone whose identity threatens everything you think you know about loyalty, duty, and the difference between serving institutions and serving principles. And sometimes, that dangerous love becomes the foundation for discovering that ordinary families can change the world when they choose truth over convenience, justice over comfort, and love over every force that tries to separate them. I am absolutely sobbing happy tears right now. Elena and Alexander didn't just get their happily ever after. They transformed their love story into a foundation that protects democratic rights worldwide. Emma is growing up to continue their mission of constitutional accountability. From a secret love affair between a billionaire and his nanny to a global force for democratic justice. This is the most incredible transformation I've ever experienced. Asterisk, asterisk. What did this amazing journey teach you about love, courage, and the power of choosing truth over convenience? About how personal happiness becomes more meaningful when it serves principles that protect other families. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. I read every single one and I treasure hearing how these stories touch your heart. Asterisk, asterisk. And if this incredible story moved you as much as it moved me, you absolutely must hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We have so many more amazing stories about love conquering impossible odds, about people choosing principle over comfort, and about families that transform personal challenges into protection for others. Asterisk, asterisk. Thank you for joining Elena, Alexander, and Emma on this incredible adventure. Sometimes love really does change the world. One family at a time, one truth at a time, one act of courage at a time. Until the next story, beautiful souls. Asterisk, asterisk.